Hello there, and welcome to this video on Romeo and Juliet, focusing on Act 1 and Scene 2. So let's jump straight in. Act 1, Scene 2 is a relatively short sequence, but it does set up several major plot lines that are worth considering. It brings in the character of Count Paris, not a verb phrase. We're not giving you an instruction here. Count or County Paris is a nobleman, rich, powerful, and single who wants to marry Juliet. Lord Capulet, however, isn't willing to see her married yet. And that's interesting because this is something that runs quite contrary to the way the play later goes. If you're using this revision, you will know, obviously, how events fold out, and in particular, thinking about Act 3, Scene 5. But here we learn some interesting things about this particular dynamic and Lord Capulet and his relationship to Juliet. A relationship that doesn't really get a lot of stage time. We do see kind of Shakespeare exploring the background, the life of the characters before they've arrived. And we also see him kind of making some comments about society. It's possibly quite a modern perception that we're saying, oh, Shakespeare's being a bit of a social critic here. But there does seem to be some kind of commentary on society, and we'll explore that in a moment. We talk about Juliet's age. We learn that, and we also learn about Capulet has had other children who have died. And we also see that Romeo and Benvolio find out about the party that Capulet is throwing, the party sequence, Act 1, Scene 5, where Romeo and Juliet meet. This is how they kind of get to know about it and end up going there. It's part of that mesh of coincidences that bring Romeo and Juliet together. We know that they're going to come together. We know that that is their fate. When we say fate, fate is a strange word for it because it's Shakespeare writing this story. They are meant to happen. So remember, Shakespeare is giving us this as a framework to show different things, to make us feel things. There is no doubt about how this ends. We've already been told how it ends, and it's a story that's already well known. So here we see the web of coincidence building to force them into meeting and then falling in love and ultimately dying. Again, it's not a spoiler. We've already been told. So what we see here is the use of something called a plot device, so a specific action that is intended just to drive the action of the play forward, so an event that just moves things on. And this play is full of them because it needed them to structure the sequence. Interestingly, again, this gives us a reason to look at the setting. We have a sequence where some characters walk on and some characters walk off. And it allows characters who would otherwise not occupy the same space to be in the same place. So one character walks through a public place and then another character comes into it. And this is what happens here. And this is not unusual. It's part of the staging because of the limits of what they can do in terms of scenery and scene changes. It starts with, Capulet reflecting on how it shouldn't be difficult for him to keep the peace between him and Montague, which is odd because they haven't done such a great job of it so far. It's taken 3 actual riots for them to decide it's probably a good idea to try and keep a lid on this. And Paris is expressing something here, which is quite interesting. The idea that he says, of honourable reckoning are you both. So he's again repeating the idea from the prologue of two households both alike in dignity, and saying 'tis pity that you both lived, you lived at odds so long. So expressing probably what most of Verona are thinking. That's a pity these two otherwise well-respected families can't seem to get on. And he's talking to Lord Capulet about his suit. Not about his latest Armani threads. This is not a sartorial conversation. This is his suit of marriage. He wants to marry Juliet. So he's saying, what if can I marry your daughter? And Capulet comes back and says, no, my child is yet a stranger in the world. Give it 2 more years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride. And this is really interesting because actually he's expressing something that wasn't typical. The idea of being married at the age of 14 from a certain political class for certain political reasons, that would have been normal in inverted commas. It certainly wouldn't have been anything that would have been unexpected. The idea of arranging a political marriage between rich and powerful families without the consent of either party well in advance, heck, that would have just been something that would have happened. And you only need to look at the controversy surrounding the British royal family, the marriage of Charles and Diana, and the suggestion is that that was kind of an arrangement that neither of those two were necessarily fully consulted on. And this is just relatively typical of these rich and powerful families. But it's interesting that Capulet says, no, she's too young, too young. It is also interesting just by saying, what I've said before, this is clearly not the first time that Paris has come and asked this question. And given that he's pointed out that Juliet hasn't yet turned 14, one wonders for how long Paris has been doing this. And it's unlikely that he's even met Juliet. So again, this shows perhaps that this is about the politics of the rich and the powerful. The marriage is not necessarily because he's met and fallen in love with this charming young woman. I mean, she's 14. So, that just doesn't seem right to us. But it seems even like he just hasn't met her at all. And when you see Act 1, Scene 3, where Juliet's mother is actually having to tell Juliet who Paris actually is, it's really clear that they have never met. That Paris is just aware that Capulet has a daughter of marriageable age. And it's obvious this is just some kind of negotiation. Paris comes back and says, it's younger than her, have been married and had children. Interesting use of the word happy mother's maid. Again, debatable that a child who is 14 could be married and be a mother herself and be happy. It's possible, I suppose. It's very difficult, certainly from our perspective, to see how that would be the case. I'm not saying there weren't children who, young girls who were married off and had children at that age. And I'm not suggesting that people don't have children at that age and are able to be successful, but it would seem that the odds are not exactly in their favor. And that use of the word happy does throw up a series of questions. And interestingly enough, Capulet also feels that. In fact, he even comes out straight out of the blocks, and too soon marred are those so early made. And this is a really powerful response, particularly in an era when that would have been far more normalized, that young, particularly noble women being married off at a young age, having children literally as soon as they were biologically able to do so and physically able to carry a child to term. He points out that, okay, that's fine, but that damages them. And it's even more extraordinary when you learn in the subsequent scene that actually Juliet's mother gave birth to Juliet when she was roughly Juliet's age. Juliet's mother even makes a point of saying that. So Capulet is clearly talking from experience. And again, we're taking out a moral judgment about that as an activity, thinking about that from a character point of view. Here we've got someone who's saying, look, I've lived an experience, I've seen it. I don't think that is a particularly good thing. And he's expressing an idea that contextually would be quite unusual. And it's interesting, though, of course, when we talk about Act 3, Scene 5, he does change his mind based on other factors that emerge throughout the play. And we also learn as well about the kind of levels of child mortality. The earth has swallowed all my hopes but she. So we learn that Capulet has lost other children, all of his other children. He'd had children, obviously, throughout his life, and they have died. We don't know whether the current Lady Capulet is the only Lady Capulet ever to have been. But what we do know is that he has buried all of his other children. And this personification, the earth has swallowed, like the earth is a creature that's devouring his future, which of course literally it does, because we know that the earth is going to swallow Juliet at the end of this, that she will be dead and buried. What is interesting here is that he asks Paris to win Juliet's heart. This is interesting. You think, from our perspective, from a modern viewer's perspective, you're like, well, yeah, if she doesn't want to marry him, there's no way that should be a thing. But that's relatively progressive given the context. And he's saying, you've got to win her heart. My consent is only part of this. If she doesn't want to marry you, that's it. And then to distract Paris, he says, look, we're gonna have a party. Come and look at some other girls, and you never know, that might take your eye off and your mind off my daughter. Sound familiar? Yep, it's exactly the same advice that Benvolio was giving to Romeo in the previous scene. And then he decides so I need to get some invites out. Here's my servant. Servant, off you go. And so Peter is given a piece of paper with a bunch of names on and told to go and find them. Interestingly enough, the problem is that Peter can't read. He needs someone to read it for him. Who could come and read it for? Oh, look, here's Benvolio and Romeo, just in time to find out about the party. Here we see that plot device, the coincidence. And the play is laced with these coincidences. And they're carrying on their conversation. Benvolio is still trying to convince Romeo to just, look at other girls, and that'll make you feel better. Romeo's still feeling sorry for himself. Oh, it's like I'm shut up in prison. Oh. And then he runs into Peter, and Peter asks him, can you read? And he goes, oh, yes, my own misfortune and misery. He's really feeling sorry for himself. But he still can't resist a little bit of a joke around. And again, this is Shakespeare kind of leavening the moment. We don't want Romeo to be too one note. So he can't resist joking with him. And he says, can you read? And he says, yes, if I know the letters in the language. He's like, all right, okay, so, oh, well. And the idea is that Peter doesn't get the joke, and we're meant to laugh because he doesn't get the joke, and we do. So again, this is Shakespeare doing that kind of class thing again, where we have Peter appearing to be less sharp and less clever than the slightly upper class characters that surround him, and again being the butt and the source of the joke. Romeo gets the lesson, says, no, I'll read it for you. And here he sees Rosaline's name. We also see Mercutio's name on there, incidentally, which is quite interesting. But Rosaline's name is on it. And, clearly this is piquing his interest. This gives him a reason to want to go to this party when Benvolio subsequently suggests that's what they should do. And again, we see that continuation of the joke. Peter, he says, so where are they going? He says, oh, to our house. He says, whose house? My master. He's like, right, yeah, no, I know that. And again, you see this joke, this comic misunderstanding, where Peter's being very literal and Romeo's trying this implied question, which is ignored. So again, you see that continuation of Peter as the humorous character. And so Benvolio goes, right, let's go there, and I know some of these girls that are on there, I will show you that they're better looking, focused on looks again, better looking than Rosaline. And he used this metaphor, I will make thee think thy swan a crow. They're going to make this girl that you think is this beautiful swan just look like some kind of carrion bird. So we've got two things going on here. We've got the comparison to a bird, which is something that we see Romeo uses as simile in a similar way in Act 1, Scene 5. And we've got that contrast of black and white going on there as well. So again, a couple of literary techniques to look at. And the hyperbole that we see Romeo referring to himself as. He says, no, that the sun has never seen a woman as beautiful as Rosaline since the beginning of time. And that is very romantic. That is tremendously romantic, but it is a little OTT. And it's interesting enough that Shakespeare even writes a sonnet about the hyperbolic language that poets tend to use. And here he is having Romeo do this. Does it kind of, is there an implication here that maybe Romeo's feelings are maybe not quite 100% genuine, and that it's the experience, the ecstasy of being in love that he's in love with rather than the actual girl? Which, given that he probably hasn't spent that much time around her, seems reasonable. So Benvolio again says, look, come on, I'll show you. Let's look at these. You've only ever seen Rosaline. You've not seen her in the company of other girls. Let's go and see if we can get rid of this fixation by comparing her beauty to other beauties. It's a fixation on looks again. It's these two teenage boys talking about comparing the way girls look. And I would love to think that we've moved on a little bit since then. I would love to think that. But I suspect, when I say suspect, I know that you will hear conversations like that between teenagers still to this day. Again, he says, oh, I'm going to go on just to look at Rosaline because she's lovely. So still focused on looks. So in summary, we see Paris asking Capulet if he can marry Juliet, Capulet knocking him back. Again, watching out for the irony of that statement and how that situation changes when we get later on through the play into Act 3, Scene 5 in particular. And we see the party structure here, which provides the opportunity for Romeo and Juliet to meet, and then Romeo intercepts the letter. Oh, it says Rome there. I do apologise. Typo. Benvolio and Romeo intercept the letter and learn of the party and decide to gate crash. And this scene really is there to set up the meeting, that all-important meeting between them. And it establishes, though, also the interesting dynamic between Capulet and his daughter, shows their relationship. And we also see some of that backdrop, the political, social backdrop of the play. And again, we also see some themes and techniques which occur much later in the play as well. So there you go, Act 1, Scene 2. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was of some use. Bye-bye.